The Sinking of a Dream, The Legend of Atlantis. History whispers to us tales of lost empires and forgotten cities, yet none has captivated the human imagination quite like that ancient civilization believed to be submerged in the desolate depths of the Atlantic, Atlantis. This is not merely a legend. It is a dark mirror reflecting humanity's technological ambition and moral decay. To find the source of the myth, we must sail to 4th century BC Athens, into the sea of thought of the great philosopher Plato. Atlantis was born not as a geographical discovery, but as a philosophical lesson. In his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, Plato presents Atlantis not as a fictional adversary, but as a true historical account heard by the Athenian statesman Solon from priests in the Egyptian city of Sais. These priests told Solon of an epic war that took place 9,000 years before their own time, during which Athens was at its most supreme. Priest, archetypal voice. Ah, Solon, you Greeks are forever children. All that remains stored in your minds are the tales of those who survived great floods. Yet your city, Athens, was the noblest and most virtuous state on earth at that time, and it defeated a mighty power. This power came from the island of Atlantis, which lay beyond the pillars of Hercules, Gibraltar. This priestly narrative firmly placed Atlantis just outside the Pillars of Hercules, Straits of Gibraltar, in the Atlantic Ocean. Atlantis, Poseidon's legacy and the Golden Age. The Critias dialogue meticulously details Atlantis's magnificent architecture and social structure. According to the story, the island's founder was the sea god Poseidon himself. Poseidon fell in love with a mortal woman named Plato and placed her upon a hill in the center of the island. They bore 5 pairs of twin sons, and these 10 men founded the 10 kingdoms of Atlantis. The eldest son, Atlas, gave his name to the entire island and the surrounding ocean. The capital city consisted of 3 concentric rings of land and water strips. These rings were interconnected by deep canals that allowed ships to reach the central temple. The city was constructed with a unique material, orichalcalca. The mystery of orichalca. Plato writes that orichalca was second in value only to gold, and that it reflected the glitter of fire. The Atlanteans lined the inner walls of Poseidon's main temple with this mysterious metal. Modern metallurgists and archaeologists debate whether this description refers to brass, an alloy of copper and zinc, or perhaps a more fantastical substance, a unique alloy found in a now submerged volcanic region, obtained from seawater. Orichalca symbolized both Atlantis's wealth and its superiority beyond ordinary earthly technology. The Atlanteans were unmatched in engineering, irrigation, and architecture. Their climate was perfect, their harvests abundant, but their true power came from their dominance in shipbuilding and sea trade. Plato suggests their empire controlled a large part of the Mediterranean, extending from Italy to Egypt. This was a golden age, but like all utopias, this perfection would eventually succumb to mortal desires. The moral decay and the divine wrath. The turning point in Plato's narrative is the moral decline. As centuries passed, the divine bloodline from Poseidon became diluted, and the Atlanteans succumbed to human hubris and greed. Wealth and power corrupted them. Their initial virtue and wisdom were replaced by an insatiable lust for conquest. They began to enslave their neighbors. This moral decay exhausted the patience of the gods. Plato interrupts his dialogue at this point, stating that Zeus gathered the other gods and addressed them, preparing to deliver the Atlanteans the punishment they deserved. Unfortunately, the Critias dialogue, as written by Plato, ends right in the middle of this speech. However, we know what the end entailed. In a single day and night of misfortune, the destruction is the climax of Plato's philosophical warning. The island is rocked by violent earthquakes and tsunamis. The ground splits, buildings crumble. Atlantis is dragged by a colossal geological catastrophe into the depths of the Atlantic, leaving behind only an impassable barrier of mud and shallow water that warns sailors away. This is the ultimate reply of nature and the gods to man's arrogance.
Geographical theories and the Minoan connection. Whether Plato wrote the story as pure fiction or was inspired by a real catastrophe is the great debate that has raged for 2 millennia. If Atlantis was a real place, where did it sink? Plato's description is clear: beyond the Pillars of Hercules. This directs our search to the Atlantic Ocean. 1. Atlantic theories beyond the Strait. The most devout Atlantologists trust Plato's word and examine the volcanic chains extending from the Caribbean to the Azores. The Azores and Canary Islands, these islands are the volcanic peaks of the mid-Atlantic ridge. Some researchers suggest they could be the last remnants of a continental fragment. Plato's timing, 9600 BC, aligns with the end of the last ice age and the period of global sea level rise. A large oceanic island could have been submerged during this era. Storybox: The Mystery of the Bimini Road. In 1968, near the island of Bimini in the Bahamas, large limestone blocks laid out in neat rows were discovered underwater. This structure, about 800 meters long, was named the Bimini Road. Esoteric theorists, especially those who believe the prophecies of the famous psychic Edgar Cayce, claimed it was the remains of a harbor or temple of Atlantis. Although geologists have proven this structure to be a natural formation, the idea of a submerged, regular road continues to live on in the hearts of Atlantis enthusiasts. 2. The Aegean Theory, the Minoan Collapse, or the Thera Event. Plato's dating, 9600 BC, and location are highly disputed. Due to the possibility of Plato playing with numbers or an error of translation by the Egyptian priests, many scientists search for Atlantis in the Mediterranean. The focal point? The Santorini volcano, or Thera. Around 1600 BC, the island of Thera in the Aegean Sea experienced one of the largest volcanic eruptions known in history. The explosion tore apart the center of the island, leaving behind a crescent-shaped caldera, Santorini. The resulting massive tsunamis and volcanic ash spelled the doom of the powerful Minoan civilization based on Crete. The Minoans, like Plato's Atlanteans, were a peaceful and seafaring civilization. The splendor of the palace of Knossos in Crete demonstrates their commitment to art and advanced infrastructure. The sudden and catastrophic end of Atlantis described by Plato mirrors the end of the Minoans almost perfectly. A giant island was shattered by an explosion. A civilization was wiped out in a single night by the ocean's power. The only difference is that Plato pushed the timeline back by 9,000 years and moved the location to the Atlantic. Many scholars believe the Atlantis legend is the memory of the Minoan Empire's epic destruction, distorted and carried to Athens via Solon or Plato. 3. The Eye of the Sahara, the Rechar Structure, Mauritania. Perhaps Atlantis is not submerged underwater, but under sand. In recent years, one of the most outlandish geographical theories has focused on the gigantic Rechar structure located in Mauritania, West Africa. Also known as the Eye of the Sahara, This geological formation, when viewed from space, bears an eerie resemblance to the concentric rings of land and water described by Plato. Plato writes that the capital of Atlantis consisted of 3 rings of land and 2 rings of water. Rechar has massive, circular layers that fit this description. Moreover, the area was once the site of a vast freshwater lake, and during the Ice Age, when the Atlantic waters receded, it was located west of the Pillars of Hercules, Gibraltar. This theory suggests that Atlantis was actually built around a great inland lake, but was eventually swallowed by the desert sands due to climate change and geological movements. The question of where Atlantis sank is a search that has become more about belief than science, a geographical enigma stretching beyond the Pillars of Hercules. But yet the power of the legend lies not in the hope of finding solid proof of its location, but in what it tells us.
Popular culture and esoteric prophecies. For centuries, Plato's story largely remained a philosophical allegory. However, in the late 19th century, global interest reignited. This time, it wasn't driven by the urge for exploration or scientific skepticism, but by a romantic quest for utopia. The legend found a new prophet, the American congressman and author Ignatius Donnelly. 1. The creator of the modern myth, Ignatius Donnelly. In 1882, Donnelly published his groundbreaking book, Atlantis, the Antediluvian World. According to Donnelly, Atlantis was not just an island, but a lost continent that was the origin of all civilization. His theory was simple and highly influential. Donnelly, archival voice, quotation. All mythologies, languages, religions, and architectural achievements feed from a single source, Atlantis. Donnelly used the similarities between the pyramids in Mexico and those in Egypt, as well as shared words in ancient Celtic, Mayan, and Egyptian languages as evidence. To him, Atlantis was the mother culture. When it sank in a catastrophe similar to Noah's flood, the survivors scattered across the globe, planting the seeds of that civilization. Donnelly's work moved the legend from academic debate to the center of popular culture, once again making Atlantis a physical place to be sought in the Atlantic Ocean.
Two, the Sleeping Prophet, Edgar Cayce's prophecies. The most striking esoteric contribution to the Atlantis legend came from the American psychic Edgar Cayce, nicknamed the Sleeping Prophet, who lived in the mid-20th century. While in a trance state, which he called readings, Cayce would diagnose illnesses and deliver prophecies. Atlantis was an integral part of his divinations. In hundreds of Cayce's readings, Atlantis is portrayed as a civilization with incredible technological power, but also spiritual arrogance. The Atlanteans harnessed energy through a massive great crystal, or Tuanoi stone, technology far beyond what was known at the time. These crystals not only powered the city, but were also used for mind reading and interdimensional travel. However, the irresponsible use of this power led to 2 major catastrophes. Cayce even gave a precise date, claiming the remaining part of Atlantis would resurface near the Bahamas in 1968 or 1969. According to Cayce, the souls of the Atlanteans have been reincarnated on Earth, and modern technologies like atomic energy and artificial intelligence risk repeating the same fate that befell Atlantis. Cayce's prophecies transformed Atlantis from a lost historical event into a vigilant warning about contemporary technology and spiritual development. 3. Cultural resonance, how the myth survived. The power of Atlantis is that regardless of scientific proof, it continues to live in modern narratives. Science fiction writers of the 19th and 20th centuries transformed Plato's story into a technological utopia. From Jules Verne, Captain Nemo's discovery of the ruins of Atlantis, to H.P. Lovecraft, eerie underwater myths, Atlantis has become a main theme of science fiction. In comics and films, such as Aquaman or Disney's Atlantis: The Lost Empire, Atlantis appears either as a mystical sanctuary that heroes must protect, or a repository of mysterious technology that humanity could misuse. Atlantis has become an archetype in our collective consciousness. It is not just the story of a magnificent civilization that once existed. It is humanity's answer to the question, what could have been better? It is also an eternal symbol of our fears regarding environmental catastrophe and technological self-destruction.
The real hunt and the archaeological claims. For all the philosophical musings and esoteric claims, the legend of Atlantis demands a tangible answer. The search for the lost city evolved from the speculative pages of books into the high-stakes world of deep-sea archaeology and oceanography. If Atlantis truly existed, its remnants must lie somewhere on the ocean floor, preserved by the cold, crushing silence of the abyss. The mid-Atlantic ridge and geological reality. Plato placed Atlantis in the Atlantic, a location that, geologically, presents a massive hurdle. Modern science confirms that continents do not simply sink. The theory of plate tectonics explains that Earth's crust is composed of massive plates floating on magma. Continents move slowly, shift, and collide. They don't suddenly plunge. Geologist interview, Dr. Eleanor Vance. The Atlantic Ocean is dominated by the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, a massive chain of volcanoes and rifts where new crust is actually being formed. If a continent-sized landmass sunk there, it would violate every principle of modern geology. However, the ridge does produce volcanic islands, like the Azores or Iceland, and these can collapse or be submerged over geological timescales. The key is distinguishing a collapsed volcano from a sunken continent. The Azores, volcanic peaks rising from the ridge, remain the most literal candidate for a submerged landmass. Explorations there, however, have yielded only natural volcanic rock formations, not the organized masonry of a mighty civilization. 2. Bimini, Cuba, and the Caribbean claims. The Bahamas region, specifically the Bimini Road, has been a focal point since the Edgar Cayce prophecies pointed to its re-emergence in the late 60s. The Bimini Road is a classic example of what we call pseudo-facts. When you look closely, the cracks are natural, the blocks are inconsistent, and the whole formation is a known geological phenomenon called beach rock. It breaks apart into seemingly organized rectangular pieces due to wave action. It looks man-made, but nature is often the greatest architect. A far more mysterious find emerged in 2001 near the western coast of Cuba. A Canadian research team, using high-resolution sonar, discovered an astonishing array of deep-sea structures. Story clip: The Cuban Megalith Anomaly. Story: Project leader Paulina Zalitsky and her team were mapping the ocean floor for a commercial venture when their sonar picked up what looked like geometric patterns at a depth of over 600 meters. The patterns suggested roads, pyramids, and massive walls, a city of enormous stone blocks, too regular to be natural. This find, often dubbed the Cuban megalith, matched some of the most sensational descriptions of a submerged capital. Crucially, the depth meant this city would have been submerged during the massive sea level changes of the Ice Age. Yet, deep-sea exploration is prohibitively expensive, and while Zalitsky insists the ruins are artificial, formal peer-reviewed archaeological consensus remains elusive due to the difficulty and cost of verification. The structures remain an anomaly rather than proof. 3. The Sahara's Eye. Is Atlantis buried in sand? If the ocean fails to yield proof, we must re-examine the most bizarre geographical theory, the Richat structure in Mauritania, West Africa. Known as the Eye of the Sahara, this is a massive geological dome that perfectly mimics the concentric rings of land and water described by Plato. The Richat structure is not a meteor crater, but a heavily eroded, uplifted dome, approximately 40 kilometers wide. It perfectly fits Plato's dimensions for the city itself. More compellingly, researchers have noted ancient riverbeds leading into the structure, suggesting it was once flooded, a giant inland sea surrounded by mountains. Proponents argue that the eye sits just east of the traditional location of the Pillars of Hercules, Gibraltar, and contains evidence of megalithic-like stone quarrying and habitation from the time period Plato suggests the Ice Age retreat. Furthermore, a cataclysmic flood, perhaps from the melting of glacial ice sheets, could have drained the huge lake surrounding the structure, aligning with the sinking aspect of the legend, which may have been misinterpreted by the Egyptians as being under the ocean. The disaster in this case would not be sinking, but the sudden disappearance of the water, the lifeblood of the civilization. However, mainstream geology firmly identifies Richat as a natural, albeit rare geological formation with no evidence of ancient high-level urban infrastructure. The idea remains an intellectual curiosity, a breathtaking coincidence that fuels the fire of conspiracy, but lacks the irrefutable evidence of carved stone, metal relics, or organized streets. 4. A warning from the past. The legacy of the flood. The search for a physical Atlantis may ultimately be a distraction from the real lesson. Most archaeologists and historians agree that the story is not literal history, but a profound geomythology, a tale rooted in genuine ancient trauma. Consider the geologic period 9600 BC. This era marks the transition from the last ice age to the current warm interglacial period. Global sea levels rose by over 120 meters. Coastlines around the world vanished, submerging vast low-lying coastal plains where early post-ice age communities thrived. This is the true global flood narrative. Stories of land sinking beneath the waves are common in nearly every coastal culture, from the British Isles to the Aboriginal Dreamtime. Atlantis may be the grand Athenian version of a memory shared by all of humanity, the memory of the sea reclaiming the land.
A city's legacy, the cultural immortality of Atlantis. The scientific search for Atlantis may often lead to dead ends in geological formations, but the cultural search never halts. Atlantis endures not as a physical location, but as an immortal idea, a foundational myth that has shaped literature, art, and cinema for centuries. It represents humanity's perfect blend of aspiration and downfall. 1. The literary imagination, from utopia to dystopia. The 19th and early 20th centuries saw the golden age of adventure literature, and Atlantis provided the perfect backdrop. Authors realized the sheer dramatic power inherent in the technologically advanced civilization swallowed whole. Jules Verne, the pioneer of science fiction, utilized the deep-sea mystery in his classic 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. His enigmatic Captain Nemo, driven by a deep resentment of the surface world, finds solace and power in the submerged ruins of Atlantis, making it a powerful symbol of isolation and self-imposed exile. Nemo's submersible, the Nautilus, glides through the ancient streets, showcasing a world preserved by the cold ocean pressure, a profound meditation on technology versus nature. Later, the concept evolved. Atlantis became a vessel for social commentary. In the works of writers like H.P. Lovecraft, the myth was twisted into something far more sinister. Lovecraft's deep-sea horrors often hinted lost non-human civilizations, precursors that sank not due to moral decay, but to their inherent cosmic difference from humanity. Atlantis, in this context, is a portal to terrifying truths the surface world is not meant to know. Story clip: The Atlantean in Modern Comics. In 1939, a new hero emerged from the depths of the Atlantic, fusing the Atlantis myth with the burgeoning comic book genre. Namor the Submariner, the half-human, half-Atlantean prince, was one of the very first comic book superheroes. His home, a hyper-advanced, militaristic, and fiercely protective underwater city, was the ultimate literalization of Plato's story. Namor's constant conflict with the surface world encapsulates the narrative tension. The fear of the unknown deep, and the paranoia that a superior hidden culture is watching, judging, and preparing for war. This version solidified Atlantis as a place of vast, alien technology and sovereign power. 2. Atlantis and the Search for Ancient Aliens. In the latter half of the 20th century, Atlantis found its place within the rapidly growing field of ancient astronaut theory. Figures like Erich von Däniken and others suggested that Atlantean technology, the crystals, the power systems, the ability to build massive megalithic structures, was not of earthly origin. This theory proposes that the Atlanteans were either descendants of extraterrestrial visitors or were given advanced technology by off-world entities. This perspective conveniently explains the 9,000 years before Solon dating, a time frame that predates all known advanced earthly civilization, and the descriptions of the orichalcum, the flying machines, sometimes hinted at in esoteric texts, and the vast energy crystals. The narrative shifts from a moral allegory to a literal scientific puzzle, positioning Atlantis as the missing link between human prehistory and interstellar civilization. It provides a thrilling, yet scientifically unverified answer to the question of why humans suddenly developed complex building techniques and astronomical knowledge. 3. The archetype of the lost utopia. Ultimately, Atlantis's lasting power is its function as a cultural archetype. It is the ultimate embodiment of the lost utopia, the perfect society that failed. Every generation has used Atlantis to reflect its most profound anxieties. In the age of Plato, it was a warning against the Athenian imperialism. In the 19th century, it was a romantic antidote to the grime and chaos of the Industrial Revolution. Today, in an era dominated by climate change, rising sea levels, and the existential threat of nuclear technology, the Atlantis myth serves its most urgent purpose yet. It is a cautionary tale about the reckless misuse of overwhelming power. The story asks us, are we, with our atomic capabilities, our genetic engineering, and our pollution, just the next Atlantis waiting for our own self-inflicted single day and night of misfortune? Atlantis is the shadow we cast on the wall of history, reminding us that no matter how magnificent our achievements, our fate is tied to our virtue.
The truth beneath the waves. After thousands of years of searching, theorizing, and dreaming, we return to the silence of the deep. What have we truly learned from the legendary Lost City of Atlantis? The scientific verdict. The overwhelming evidence points away from a literal, continent-sized civilization that sank in the Atlantic 11,600 years ago. Tectonic plates do not allow for such sudden, massive disappearances. The most plausible historical route remains the catastrophic collapse of the Minoan civilization on Thera, a genuine, immense catastrophe misremembered and exaggerated. The intriguing anomalies, the Bimini Road, the Cuban megaliths, the Richat structure, all have more mundane geological explanations, though they will forever remain sacred sites for the true believers. Dr. Eleanor Vance, Final Reflection. We must separate the fact from the fiction. The fact is that coastal areas submerge. The fiction is that a global superpower with crystals and advanced flight sank in one night. But the most valuable thing about the myth
is the way it forces us to confront our own past and the idea that great civilizations are fragile. The true legacy of Atlantis is its role as a perfect geomythology. It is a grand narrative designed to encapsulate a terrifying, universal truth. No power is eternal, and the forces of nature, or the corruptibility of the human soul, will always bring even the mightiest creations to ruin. Plato used Atlantis as a literary device to demonstrate the superiority of his ideal state, ancient Athens, over a militaristic, wealthy, and arrogant superpower. The myth is not about where the city is, but why it fell. It is a permanent reminder that the pursuit of technological mastery, divorced from moral philosophy, leads inevitably to disaster. Perhaps, in our modern search for its ruins, we are not looking for the stones and the orichalcum, but for a reflection of ourselves, a warning etched in the collective memory of the deep. The lost city of Atlantis may not lie beneath the Atlantic's waves, but within the cautionary tales we tell ourselves, forever guiding us away from the fate of the arrogant.
The mystery of orichalcum. Plato writes that orichalcum was second in value only to gold, and that it reflected the glitter of fire. The Atlanteans lined the inner walls of Poseidon's main temple with this mysterious metal. Modern metallurgists and archaeologists debate whether this description refers to brass, an alloy of copper and zinc, or perhaps a more fantastical substance, a unique alloy found in a now submerged volcanic region obtained from seawater. Orichalcum symbolized both Atlantis's wealth and its superiority beyond ordinary earthly technology. The Atlanteans were unmatched in engineering, irrigation, and architecture. Their climate was perfect, their harvests abundant. But their true power came from their dominance in shipbuilding and sea trade. Plato suggests their empire controlled a large part of the Mediterranean, extending from Italy to Egypt. This was a golden age, but like all utopias, this perfection would eventually succumb to mortal desires. The moral decay and the divine wrath. The turning point in Plato's narrative is the moral decline. As centuries passed, the divine bloodline from Poseidon became diluted, and the Atlanteans succumbed to human hubris and greed. Wealth and power corrupted them. Their initial virtue and wisdom were replaced by an insatiable lust for conquest. They began to enslave their neighbors. This moral decay exhausted the patience of the gods. Plato interrupts his dialogue at this point, stating that Zeus gathered the other gods and addressed them, preparing to deliver the Atlanteans the punishment they deserved. Unfortunately, the Critias dialogue, as written by Plato, ends right in the middle of this speech. However, we know what the end entailed. In a single day and night of misfortune, the destruction is the climax of Plato's philosophical warning. The island is rocked by violent earthquakes and tsunamis. The ground splits, buildings crumble. Atlantis is dragged by a colossal geological catastrophe into the depths of the Atlantic Ocean, leaving behind only an impassable barrier of mud and shallow water that warns sailors away. This is the ultimate reply of nature and the gods to man's arrogance. Geographical theories and the Minoan connection. Whether Plato wrote the story as pure fiction or was inspired by a real catastrophe is the great debate that has raged for 2 millennia. If Atlantis was a real place, where did it sink? Plato's description is clear: beyond the pillars of Hercules. This directs our search to the Atlantic Ocean. 1. Atlantic theories. Beyond the Strait. The most devout Atlantologists trust Plato's word and examine the volcanic chains extending from the Caribbean to the Azores. The Azores and Canary Islands. These islands are the volcanic peaks of the mid-Atlantic ridge.
Some researchers suggest they could be the last remnants of a lanking continental fragment. Plato's timing, 9600 BC, aligns with the end of the last ice age and the period of global sea level rise. A large oceanic island could have been submerged during this era. The mystery of the Bimini Road. In 1968, near the island of Bimini in the Bahamas, large limestone blocks laid out in neat rows were discovered underwater. This structure, about 800 meters long, was named the Bimini Road. Esoteric theorists, especially those who believe the prophecies of the famous psychic Edgar Cayce, claimed it was the remains of a harbor or temple of Atlantis. Although geologists have proven this structure to be a natural formation, the idea of a submerged regular road continues to live on in the hearts of Atlantis enthusiasts. The Aegean theory, the Minoan collapse, the Thera event. Plato's timing, 9600 BC, and location, Atlantic, are highly disputed. Due to the possibility of Plato playing with numbers or an error in translation by the Egyptian priests, many scientists search for Atlantis in the Mediterranean. The focal point? The Santorini, Thera volcano. Around 1600 BC, the island of Thera in the Aegean Sea experienced one of the largest volcanic eruptions known in history. The explosion tore apart the center of the island, leaving behind a crescent-shaped caldera, Santorini. The resulting massive tsunamis and volcanic ash spelled the doom of the powerful Minoan civilization based on Crete. Storybox: The Tears of Crete. The Minoans, like Plato's Atlanteans, were a peaceful and seafaring civilization. The splendor of the Palace of Croesus in Crete demonstrates their commitment to art and advanced infrastructure. The sudden and catastrophic end of Atlantis described by Plato mirrors the end of the Minoans almost perfectly. A giant island was shattered by an explosion. A civilization was wiped out in a single night by the ocean's power. The only difference is that Plato pushed the timeline back by 9,000 years and moved the location to the Atlantic. Many scholars believe the Atlantis legend is the memory of the Minoan Empire's epic destruction, distorted and carried to Athens via Solon or Plato. The Eye of the Sahara, the Rishat structure, Mauritania. Perhaps Atlantis is not submerged under water, but under sand. In recent years, one of the most outlandish geographical theories has focused on the gigantic Rishat structure located in Mauritania, West Africa. Also known as the Eye of the Sahara, this geological formation, when viewed from space, bears an eerie resemblance to the concentric rings of land and water described by Plato. Plato writes that the capital of Atlantis consisted of 3 rings of land and 2 rings of water. Rishat has massive circular layers that fit this description. Moreover, the area was once the site of a vast freshwater lake, and during the Ice Age, when the Atlantic waters receded, it was located west of the Pillars of Hercules. This theory suggests that Atlantis was actually built around a great inland lake, but was eventually swallowed by the desert sands due to climate change and geological movements. The question of where Atlantis sank is a search that has become more about belief than science, a geographical enigma stretching beyond the Pillars of Hercules. Yet the power of the legend lies not in the hope of finding solid proof of its location, but in what it tells us.
Global echoes, the sister myths of Mu and the Meria. Atlantis is not an isolated obsession. It is the most famous example of a deeper human need to believe in a lost, progenitor civilization. The 19th and early 20th centuries, fueled by esoteric movements like theosophy, gave rise to Atlantis's sister myths, the continents of Mu and Lemuria. The idea of Mu, a vast Pacific continent, was popularized by Augustus Le Plongeon and later championed by Colonel James Churchward. Churchward claimed to have translated ancient Nakal tablets in India,
which detailed Mu as the motherland of human civilization existing before Atlantis. The narrative creates a linear chain of lost empires, satisfying the urge to find a single grand origin for all human culture. Despite zero archaeological evidence for a continent of this size, Mu remains a cornerstone of alternative history. Simultaneously, the concept of Lemuria emerged, originally proposed by zoologist Philip Sclater in 1864, not as a civilization, but as a land bridge to explain the distribution of lemur species across Madagascar, India, and Indonesia. Like Atlantis, Lemuria was quickly co-opted by esoteric groups. Helena Blavatsky's Theosophy movement placed the third root race, giant, primordial, and androgynous beings, on Lemuria. These spiritual philosophies treated the continents not as geographical entities, but as evolutionary stages of humanity's psychic and physical development. The common thread linking Atlantis, Mu, and Lemuria is their sudden, cataclysmic end, a geological reset button that allows modern civilization to feel superior, yet perpetually anxious about its own mortality. These system myths ensure that the search for Atlantis is always part of a larger global hunt for lost wisdom. The Atlantis effect, influence on science and warfare. The power of the Atlantis myth transcended literature and spiritualism, seeping into the political, military, and scientific thinking of the 20th century, often with unsettling consequences. Nazi Germany and the Aryan root race. One of the most infamous cultural appropriations of the Atlantis myth occurred in Nazi Germany. Influenced by Blavatsky's Theosophy, high-ranking Nazi officials, particularly Heinrich Himmler, became obsessed with finding the origins of the purported Aryan master race. They reinterpreted the Atlantis narrative. Instead of sinking due to moral decay, the Atlanteans were seen as the ancestors of the superior Aryan race, survivors who carried their pure bloodline and advanced technology to places like Iceland and Tibet. The sinking was viewed as a deliberate cosmic trial, purifying the race. The Nazi regime funded several esoteric expeditions, including trips to Tibet and the Canary Islands, seeking proof of this Atlantean lineage and hoping to harness their supposed psychic energy and technology. This dark period demonstrates how easily a myth can be weaponized to justify genocide and extreme political ideologies, transforming a philosophical allegory into a dangerous pseudo-scientific doctrine. The birth of oceanography. Paradoxically, the fervent public interest in Atlantis contributed to the birth of modern scientific disciplines. The popular imagination, fueled by Donnelly and Verne, put immense pressure on scientists to explore the deep ocean. Before the mid-20th century, the deep sea was almost entirely unknown. The theoretical possibility of Atlantis spurred investment in oceanographic technology, including deep-sea sonar, remote operating vehicles, ROVs, and specialized submersibles. While the search for Atlantean temples failed, these explorations led to fundamental discoveries. The Mid-Atlantic Ridge. Detailed mapping revealed the massive geological rift which explained plate tectonics but ruled out a sunken continent. Deep sea vents. The discovery of hydrothermal vents revolutionized biology, showing that life could thrive independent of the sun's energy, an idea as wondrous as a sunken city. Detailed seafloor topography. The sonar mapping, initially motivated by the hunt for Atlantis or sunken treasures, provided crucial data for modern climate science and navigation. In a sense, the scientists who set out to find a lost utopia ended up finding a vast, complex, and previously unimagined reality, the geology and ecology of the deep ocean. The failed hunt for Atlantis birthed the science of oceanography.
Atlantis in the age of the Anthropocene. We began this journey in the philosophical mind of Plato, and we ended in the urgency of our present moment. The myth of Atlantis has never been more relevant than in the Anthropocene,
the geological age defined by human impact on Earth. Today, the sinking of coastal cities is not a mythological threat, but a predictable scientific outcome. From Venice to Miami, from Bangladesh to the Netherlands, the threat of rising sea levels, driven by the very technological advancement that Plato warned against, is turning the Atlantis myth into a contemporary reality. The story serves as a profound ethical dilemma for the 21st century. The very things that allow us to build an Atlantis, technology, energy mastery, global dominance, are the same forces that will inevitably dismantle it. The hubris of the Atlanteans, their reliance on overwhelming power to solve all problems, is mirrored in our own faith in technological fixes for a collapsing ecosystem. Perhaps the entire epos of Atlantis, Mu, and Lemuria is not about lost history, but about prophecy. It is the recurring nightmare of a species that repeatedly reaches for the divine, only to fall back into the catastrophic consequences of its own imperfect nature. The search continues, not just for a city beneath the waves, but for the moral compass to navigate the future. Atlantis is forever the city we must remember to prevent it from becoming the city we will become. The lost technology and the Orichalcum enigma. Beyond the city's fate and its location, the core fascination with Atlantis lies in the details of its reported superior technology. Plato described a society that had mastered engineering, hydraulics, and metallurgy to an extent unparalleled in the ancient world. If the legend is even partially true, it implies a lost golden age of innovation. 1. The riddle of Orichalcum. The signature technological marvel of Atlantis, according to Plato, was Orichalcum, a mysterious metal used to adorn the central temples and provide a fiery gleam. He clearly stated it was the second most valuable substance after gold. Metallurgist interview, Dr. Alastair Finch. The description of Orichalcum, reflecting fire and possessing high value, strongly suggests a highly refined alloy. The most common modern identification is a form of brass, an alloy of copper and zinc. However, the sheer abundance and specialized use described by Plato imply a metallurgy far more advanced than that of classical Greece, where brass was rare. Some suggest it was a natural volcanic alloy, perhaps only found on that specific island, which is why it vanished completely after the sinking. The idea of Orichalcum tantalizes because it suggests a level of resource extraction and material science that should have left detectable traces. Its absence in the historical record strengthens the argument that Atlantis is pure fiction, yet its compelling description keeps the hunt alive for a uniquely crafted lost world metal. 2. Hydraulics and geothermal energy. Visuals. Animated diagrams showing the flow of hot and cold water through the city's ring canals. Geothermal vents in the deep sea. The Atlantean capital was a masterpiece of urban planning and hydraulic engineering. The concentric rings were not just for aesthetics, they facilitated massive maritime traffic and, crucially, water management. Plato describes the Atlanteans utilizing both hot and cold springs, channeling them into public baths, fountains, and complex irrigation systems. This implies a mastery of geothermal energy. Being a volcanic island, Atlantis would have had abundant thermal sources. The Atlanteans likely harnessed this energy to provide heating and perhaps even kinetic energy for basic machinery. This detail is highly plausible in the context of a large, sophisticated volcanic island civilization. They managed water flow across vast distances, a feat that would not be equaled until the height of the Roman Empire, thousands of years later. This is perhaps the most believable aspect of their technology, an advanced yet earthly use of natural resources. 3. The crystal power source, or esoteric views.
In contrast to plausible hydraulics, the esoteric tradition, primarily fueled by the readings of Edgar Cayce, claims a far more spectacular technology, a vast central energy source, the Great Crystal, or Tournois stone. This crystal supposedly drew cosmic or atmospheric energy, providing light, heat, and power for advanced propulsion, possibly for airships and submersible craft. Cayce's followers believe the Atlanteans misused this spiritual energy, leading to catastrophic explosions that accelerated the island's destruction.
The Black Sea Theory, the Flood Myth Connection. A more dramatic, yet geographically distant theory ties Atlantis to the catastrophic flooding of the Black Sea. In the 1990s, geologists William Ryan and Walter Pittman proposed that around 5600 BC, a massive deluge occurred when the Mediterranean Sea breached the land bridge at the Bosphorus, turning the freshwater Black Sea Lake into a massive saltwater sea. This event raised the Black Sea's water level rapidly, displacing coastal populations and causing immense, sudden destruction. The theory proposes that the memory of this enormous localized flood, a real-life, single day and night of misfortune, became the historical core of the global flood narratives, including Atlantis. However, this theory requires significant geographical flexibility, as it places the city thousands of miles from the Atlantic and the stated pillars of Hercules. The strength of the Black Sea theory is its ability to explain the global memory of a cataclysm, rather than pinpointing a specific city. Part 12. Atlantis and the Global Conspiracy Network. For the most dedicated believers, the inability of science to find Atlantis is not a failure of the myth, but proof of a global conspiracy. The theory goes, the evidence is not lost. It is being actively suppressed by powerful organizations. The hidden knowledge and the brotherhoods. From the 17th century onward, esoteric movements claimed to possess secret knowledge passed down from Atlantean survivors. Groups like Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism incorporated Atlantean symbols and ideas into their doctrines, suggesting that they were the custodians of this advanced, moral, and technological wisdom. This gave rise to the belief in a secret brotherhood, an unbroken line of adepts who escaped the flood, settled in places like Egypt or Mesoamerica, and guided early human development. The pyramids, the Mayan calendars, and the incredible engineering of ancient sites are cited as proof that these survivors used their superior Atlantean knowledge to kickstart subsequent civilizations. Therefore, those who control modern power structures are merely the latest iteration of this secret society, concealing the truth to maintain their dominance. The Smithsonian cover-up theory. A popular American conspiracy narrative centers on the Smithsonian Institution. This theory, often linked to the discovery of gigantic human remains, Nephilim or Atlantean giants, claims the Smithsonian and other mainstream organizations are actively suppressing archaeological finds that contradict the established narrative of human evolution. Proponents argue that evidence of advanced Atlantean technology or the gigantic bones of its inhabitants has been found, but these discoveries are immediately confiscated, categorized as hoaxes, and locked away in secure vaults. The reason? To prevent mass panic and to protect the scientific orthodoxy that denies the existence of supercivilizations that predate recorded history. This theory taps into a deep distrust of established authority and transforms the search for Atlantis into a battle for truth against a deceptive elite. The Cayce timeline revisited. The enduring power of Edgar Cayce's prophecy that part of the Atlantean temple complex would rise near Bimini in 1968 or 1969 continues to fuel the conspiracy angle. When the Bimini Road was discovered precisely in 1968, it became a powerful, tangible piece of evidence for believers.
The subsequent scientific debunking of the Bimini Road is, to the conspiracy theorist, merely part of the cover-up. They believe the government or scientific establishment actively lied to dismiss Casey's stunning accuracy, ensuring the public never truly questioned the accepted timeline of human history. The Twin-Eye Stone is still down there, they argue, waiting for the right time to re-emerge and initiate a new age of technological and spiritual reckoning. The reality of Atlantis may be irrelevant. Its existence as a suppressed truth, however, is a vital cornerstone of the modern conspiracy ecosystem. Atlantis in modern media and gaming worlds. If the scientific community has abandoned the physical search for Atlantis, the world of modern media has embraced it fully. Video games, blockbuster films, and animation have transformed the philosophical allegory into a dynamic, interactive environment, a treasure trove of narrative potential. The Temple of the First Civilization. Contemporary fiction often merges the myth of Atlantis with the concept of a first civilization, a technologically supreme race that guided human history. The Assassin's Creed video game series, for instance, uses Atlantis and its associated sites as key locations for the advanced pre-human Isu civilization. In these modern narratives, Atlantis is not merely a lost city of stone. It is a complex of super laboratories and planetary defense systems built by beings who understood reality on a far deeper level than we do today. This interpretation fulfills the ancient astronaut theory by giving the Atlanteans clear, non-human origins and incredibly powerful, godlike technology, such as advanced holography and time manipulation devices. The myth provides the ultimate sandbox for science fiction. Displacing the cultural narrative. The comic book genre, which gave us Namor the Submariner, continues to evolve the myth. In the DC Comics universe, Atlantis serves as the homeland for Aquaman, a kingdom portrayed as technologically and militarily superior to the surface world. This narrative frequently centers on geopolitical tension. The Atlanteans are inherently distrustful of the polluting, destructive surface dwellers. The sinking of their original home is perpetually cited as justification for isolationism or sometimes aggression. Here, Atlantis becomes a powerful symbol of environmental justice and the deep ocean's right to sovereignty, reflecting modern anxieties about ocean pollution and resource exploitation.
The final legacy, wisdom from the waves. What wisdom, then, rises from the waves of this enduring legend? The answer is not in the location of the ruins, but in the nature of the fall. The legacy of Atlantis is a simple, enduring principle, first articulated by the philosopher who created it. The penalty good men pay for not being interested in government is to be governed by men worse than themselves. Plato. Atlantis reminds us that the greatest external threat is always the internal corruption. It is the perfect society that chooses its own destruction through the pursuit of material gain over the pursuit of moral perfection. The last word, words from the depths. We close the chapter on the physical search, but the journey continues in the conscience. Atlantis leaves us with its final, powerful, and timeless maxims. All great societies are fragile, for the greatest catastrophe is not an earthquake, but the tremor in the soul of the people. To search for the lost city is to search for the golden age within ourselves, a virtue that sank not into the ocean, but into the depths of human ambition. The sea does not forgive hubris. Atlantis is the echo of the past, a warning in the water, ensuring that humanity never forgets the cost of its own technological pride. We never found Atlantis because we are still living in it. The sinking of a dream, the legend of Atlantis.